Welcome to Terabytes. And to our team of deeply specialised thumbnail editors for this wildly inaccurate, increasingly spurious and deeply misleading thumbnail. Thanks again, guys. This is the second part of episode 2 about the Drove Roads. In the first part we discussed how the Drove Roads were created, and in this episode we're going to be looking at how old are the Drove Roads. Now, better scholars than I have pored over numerous manuscripts, and we can say with certainty that droving, as far as the records go, began around about 1100 CE. But if we want to know any information further back than that, then records are not going to be any use. We're going to have to turn to science. Before we continue, I'd like to say something about unsung heroes. These are the people who spend sometimes an entire lifetime searching through, for example, the vast millions of amphora shards and cataloguing by chronology and location that enable an archaeologist in Rhynie Buchan to find a handle from a Roman amphora and say, it was made in the workshop of Marcius and Spencerus in Florence, 43 CE on the 1st of April, about tea time. Sometimes it's as good a gauge as an own coin. This is an isomap or an isoscape of Scotland. What follows is a discussion about 6 teeth, cattle teeth that were found in Burghead and their analysis. But I should point out that yes, the lab technicians did 6 isotope analysis, but there was also lab technicians who tested thousands of water and plant samples right across Scotland to create this map. But there was also those people who went to each and every location on the map to take the samples in the first place. Thousands of very inaccessible parts of Scotland. It's the ability to compare the 6 samples found in Burghead against the map that gives us the information. I think this type of work is the true backbone of archaeology, often unsung, but not in this video. Have a round of applause. Some areas have the same colour, same isotope levels. While it may be true, but if the cattle's teeth in Burghead have the same levels of isotopes in the grounds in Fife, if the teeth are found in Burghead, then they're most likely to be local, not from Fife. Here's Kate Britton discussing the results.
6 of them, data came back, and essentially none of them are local. 3 of them bear a signature that's slightly cooler and older mythology, inland Highland cows. Nice, okay, so you can get from Burghead to more inland areas quite readily. 20, 30, 40 miles, not so far. Highland coos, so 3 of our 6 Highland cows. One of them, a local-ish signal in the strontium, a little bit warm in the oxygen, but okay. But the strontium concentration, which is something I haven't really talked about, absolutely sky high. And this is quite a common feature of animals and people that grow up on soils and certainly a feature of the Scottish Islands that are enriched with marine shells. They're called nacre soils, right? So that's evidence in that case, that individual. It can't be local because we don't have nacre soils in that area, but we do have them just over the water in Orkney, for example. And the strontium and oxygen were a match for Orkney. So we thought, okay, cows from over the water, fair enough. One of the cows, the oxygen was lovely and warm again, so just like those West Coast pigs. So a West Coast cow. And then another cow, we did 2 teeth from this cow just to make sure, came up with a strontium value that was quite old, so an older lithology, radiogenic value, and the oxygen too cold for the UK. So if I had the next slide, I would show you a map now of Europe. And that trend that you get across Scotland and England from those west coasterly values, thanks to the Gulf Stream that keeps the west coast of Europe nice and toasty, gets gradually warmer and warmer. And the more continental you get into Europe, so places like the Baltic, Scandinavia, mean average annual values the rainfall will be depleted, they'll be lower. And those values are essentially matching Scandinavia. So we have at least, in the 6 cows we looked at, 3 Highland cows, 1 West Coast cow, a possible island, as in Orkney Isle cow, and a Scandi cow.
This is a distribution map of the locations Professor Kate Britton was mentioning, if you're less familiar with the geography. You can see Burghead with the blue pin in the northeast of Scotland, to the north in Orkney, to the west on the west coast of Scotland, and 3 in the Highlands. And probably the biggest shocker is the one from Scandinavia, or Lochlin, or Land of the Lochs as it's known in Gaelic, the homeland of the Clan MacLachlan. In summary, what we have now is scientific proof of the long distance movement of cattle from about 400 CE onwards. If they can get from Scandinavia to Burghead and from Orkney to Burghead, then there are no islands, whether Inner or Outer Hebrides in Scotland, that they couldn't have got to either. Also, the 3 cows that came from the Highlands, this is an indication that the drove roads in the Highlands, at least northwards, existed at that early date. And as this expands, this project, they may begin to fill in the blanks. Because if they can go north from the Highlands, they can go south from the Highlands down towards Crieff and Falkirk. Perhaps as this project expands, they'll begin to fill in the gaps, and we'll begin to know exactly what the extent of the drove roads from that early time were. Not just around Burghead, but also from all over Britain. I would encourage you to go back and actually look at the entire video. It's very, very interesting, and I think Kate Britton does an excellent job presenting it. During the destruction of Burghead Fort in the 17 and 1800s, for the construction of the harbour and the village there, they came across 25 to 30 of these. Now, only 6 have survived, 2 in Elgin, 2 in Burghead, 1 in the Museum of Scotland in Edinburgh, and 1 in the British Museum down in London. But carvings of any description in this area are extremely rare, especially from this early date. But the fact that they had as many as 25 of these, all inside Burghead, is an indication of just how important that cattle were to these people. For the moment, we don't know what fiendishly clever techniques scientists will come up within the future to eliminate the past. But for the moment, if we want to know or go further back in time with regards to droving, we now need to turn to myths and legends. Irish literature, myths and legends, are full of reference to cattle raids. But the Tambo Cooley, the cattle raid of Cooley, is probably one of the best well known. It is set in at least very far past. Exactly when is debatable, but most agree it's got to be pre-circa 500 BCE. These stories surround the exploits of courageous warriors like Setanta Cuchulainn, fighting off armies, demons, monsters, etc. But invariably, the reasons behind the cause of the exploits in the first place was cattle raiding, and cattle raiding there was in abundance. But this isn't a video about legal cattle droving, it's about how old these drove roads are. And if, for example, someone lifts 50 cattle from point A and moves them 50 miles to point B, it kind of presupposes that there's already a drove road there for them to do this. Otherwise, by the time one gets halfway, the cattle will die of starvation. I toyed with the idea that if there was large-scale and long-distance cattle raids in the past, there could have been large-scale and long-distance cattle trading as well. If a man's wealth is measured in cattle, what do you spend it on? I'm not totally convinced by this argument. since the idea might be born out of my 21st century preconceived ideas of what the difference between raiding and trading is, the people in the very distant past might not have seen the difference. Perhaps the point for them would have been too subtle. Unlike consumers at the end of the road, consumers who, just like today, probably didn't care where the beef came from either. So regardless of whether there was organised trade in a form that we would recognise today, even with just cattle raids, there are always winners and losers. Someone always makes a profit. In the 1700s and 1800s in America, Wales, Australia, Scotland, both cattle raiding and cattle trading happened simultaneously, regardless of what someone's idea of what constituted legal or otherwise. Really didn't change the life of the drovers at all. They still had to take arduously long journeys, stave off frequent violent personal attacks on themselves by all comers, and stop folk rustling, lifting and stealing their cattle. Now, the MacGregor's concept of legality was that if you were able and capable of raiding an area, stealing cattle and killing folk, that was the only justification required. Insulting a man's family honour was illegal and would bring swift punishment, but raiding another settlement wasn't considered a crime. I'll discuss more about the dangers suffered by drovers in a later date. I think I'll end this video on that note. The video's a bit shorter than I usually like, but the next part of this series of films is going to be about actual cattle droves from the islands to the mainlands, from Wales into England, and also from the northeast of Scotland down into the Highlands and down to Crieff and Falkirk. So if you like the video, please smash the like button and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video.